And we are back with the Dr. Joe Show with a really interesting conversation that's going on right now, right here.
It is. It's really interesting. When we were off air, we were talking to Lori and Joe a little bit about how they actually recruited kids to be in the show. And I wondered for our WATD audience, Lori, could you just go over some of that again? How you got the kids?
Okay, so I have a big mouth. I know a lot of people. And so I'm always asking if anybody wants to talk to us about it and or if their kids want to talk to us about it. That's been tough because kids can't be on or in a documentary unless they're 18 and they can, a lot of kids, parents don't know they're vaping. So you can't have them on, you need parental consent. But they're really good at hiding it in their sleeves and hiding it so parents don't know that they're vaping. Parents don't want to talk about it because it's painful. They've been duped. They were told this was safe. It's not safe. So I found a few people that would talk with us, a mother and a son, but they wanted to be incognito. They didn't want anybody to know who they are. They're hiding their identities. You just have to go with what you can. We have another gentleman we are going to be interviewing, and he lives, in Michigan. So we'll be going out to interview him after I get some COVID shots, because I'm not going to go out until I get some COVID shots. But you just keep asking and you just keep plugging away, you get somebody.
So did you find that the kids didn't want to talk because they didn't want their parents to know? And granted, we can't get minors, to be on shows like this without parental permission. Was it that? And then this mom and son, was it the stigma that was associated with this as well? Joe, you're nodding your head. So is it the stigma?
The stigma, and I think for the young people that we were interviewing, they didn't want to be identified because they knew they were going to be, ridiculed by their peers. It's incredible just how insidious this addiction is, to the point where the kids know they're addicted, but they don't want to be alone in their addiction. So they're going to ridicule someone trying to get to break the habit.
Huh. Interesting. So this is a peer pressure as well.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And now it gets crazier, Dr. Joe. Think about this. We're in the middle of a pandemic. You got kids that are, remote learning, isolating at home with addictions.
Oh, yes.
And I believe that the CDC recently shared last year, those who were still actively vaping were 5 times more likely to get COVID than those who were not vaping.
Well, that's an interesting piece of data. Of course, it makes sense, doesn't it? For ingesting something into your lungs. That's really interesting.
Here's the big misnomer. Why they come up with the term vaping? That's vaporizing, and that's not vaping. What you're really doing is you may as well just take a can of hairspray and just sort of do like you would do with whipped cream.
Yeah, aerosol.
Aerosol.
So how did you guys do some of the research on this? I mean, you're talking about a lot of sort of granular psychobiology here and neurobiology. Where'd you get your research, Lori?
Well, we read about stuff, and also I have a teenage son who I could talk to about things. So I knew some of the things that were going on. And, just walking down the street, you could see kids vaping. That's one thing. Dr. Jonathan Whitikoff is from Mass General, and he's a pediatrician there, and he's also a Harvard professor. And he was wonderful. He gave us a lot of wonderful information. Maura Healy was amazing. She gave us a whole bunch. She taught us a lot of things as well. I'm sure Joe has some pointers on that one too.
There's also an organization called Parents Against Vaping. They shared some information with us. We did the good old-fashioned research online, particularly with respect to, if you recall, back in early 2020, when the nation began to see this spike in vaping-related deaths. And the feeling was that some of these pods were coming from the black market, you know, someone making these chemicals in their backyard, and it was killing some of our young people.
Mhm.
And following this trail just opened up so many doors. We talked with dentists, neurologists, child psychologists, pediatricians, uh, dare officers in the schools, just amazing stories that they shared with us about, you know, like whack-a-mole, how do you track down
Mhm.
and tamp down these young people who are actively vaping?
I wonder, seeing that we've mentioned Maura Healey in this other position, Tom, can we just play the clip that's on the website?
Sure thing.
In 2015, there's a company out of San Francisco called Juul. Juul came to market with a big social media campaign that, in our view, was targeted towards young people.
Suddenly you have large numbers of kids inhaling a super highly concentrated nicotine without any consequence at all, in terms of their brain saying, this is a poison, this is dangerous. The fact is, those kids are addicted because of the willful actions of these companies putting profit over the health of the American people and my patients. And honestly, that makes me really sad and angry.
Taking a toke. It's a powerful, powerful trailer. How do people get to see the rest of it?
Well,
How do people get to see the rest of it?
we have to finish the film. We're about 80% done with filming. It's editing and fundraising so that we can create the money to do that. So we're still finishing it up.
But one of the things that we do want to share with our audience is that Lori and I recently decided, to the extent possible, using virtual platforms like Zoom, to share what we've already gathered and to share that with parent organizations in the schools, community health departments and the like. We want to help continue to build awareness again in the middle of this pandemic, because we have young people who are suffering in silence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the silence is in part because of the stigma or because their parents don't know and they're afraid. What do you think all the silence is? Or is it that we as the adults just don't get it yet? What do you think? How do we not only tease that apart, but how do we get the parents who actually, let me just ask this, who's the audience for this? Who should be listening to this?
This is really
Everybody. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Everybody should be. Parents, educators. We also need legislators. And we also want the kids. So it's short.
Yes.
It's going to be about 45 minutes long. But it's supposed to, everybody should be able to watch it because it'll get something, everybody will get something out of it.
This is great. So you're like right in the midst of it. How can people get involved at this point?
Well,
Joe?
they can donate. Go
Lori?
ahead, Joe.
Well, that's true. They can donate. So
Well, we also
Joe,
want them to go to the website, takingatoke.com. On that landing site, they can contribute, whether their time, money, and their testimony. We still want to hear from people who have a story to tell. We have a central character that we're developing. We won't go into too much detail on that, but there are what I would call a cast of supporting characters, and everybody has an authentic experience that is worthy of sharing with us. And we want to give them that opportunity, whether they want to sit in front of the camera or we'll have them in silhouette so that they're able to speak their truth and still maintain their anonymity.
What are the most common health concerns that are facing these kids when they first start using and maybe go 6 months to a year? What are they seeing?
Well, the first is respiratory. Here's what's really crazy. Last year, 2020, when we had these deaths around the United States, and Congress was was getting pressured to do something. And what happened was they got the tobacco industry, who's behind these vaping products, to eliminate certain flavors: mango, watermelon, blueberry, pop, bubble gum. But they lobbied Congress to keep mint. Why?
Why? Exactly. Why?
Well, we found out because mint kind of sort of freezes your mouth in such a way that the vaping product freezes your throat so that the vaping product gets to your frontal cortex and you are almost instantaneously addicted.
So let me just clarify this for a moment in terms of the part of the brain. So the nicotine is affecting the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex is also being affected based on what you're saying. So tell me this understanding, because my understanding of addiction is the prefrontal cortex is impacted because it is taken over by the addiction. It's not able to then really begin to assess what will happen next if I keep doing this now. So there is, people need to understand the risk, not just for the adults because of the lungs, but in kids. This is one of the gateways to lifelong addiction, and then a progression to other drugs. And people don't always think, they'd say, oh, what is, it's just nicotine.
No.
It is the beginning. Laura, you want to comment on this?
Yes. Okay. So now they have these things called dab pens. The dab pens are THC. Well, kids are already used to vaping. So the dab pen is just another vape to them. And there are a lot of kids that have been using these thinking it's nicotine, but it's THC.
Yeah.
And they end up in the hospital because some of them are on medicine for ADD. We had the DARE officer in giving us this story that was just like, oh my goodness. So it's really dangerous because if you're already vaping, what's the difference if you're vaping THC or something else? And kids are passing stuff out. They don't know what's what. And so it becomes very dangerous. This is also a very, very potent tobacco. The tobacco is, they do something with the acid in the tobacco, makes it really, really, really strong and powerful. And that's why it takes only a little bit of this to get you addicted and hit the frontal lobe and hit the endorphins. So it's just, people don't understand that it's not like a cigarette. Way, way, way stronger.
It absolutely is. We can talk a little bit about some of the understanding of the neuroscience of this in a bit, but let's just stick with the idea that kids are susceptible to being addicted, and what can happen next is that they can then move on to other drugs. And people certainly understand a nicotine addiction, because they've seen it, but they do not understand marijuana and THC addiction, which is also incredibly addictive. It's just that people don't recognize it because they don't have the same sort of withdrawal. But now, with, like, one of the things I like to say, with the stuff that's going around now, this ain't your grandfather's weed. I mean, this is like
Strong.
so much stronger in the THC. We'll have another show at some point about CBD stuff, but we're talking now really about nicotine and how addictive it is. And you guys know the numbers, right? You start using drugs or alcohol, which includes nicotine, after the age of 21, 1 out of 25 people are at risk for lifelong addiction. You start using before the age of 18, and that means using anything before the age of 18. That number goes from 1 in 25 to 1 in 4. I just want people to understand that your kids are at risk for addiction, lifelong addiction. 1 out of 4 of them. I don't know which one. You don't know which one. And so for the parents out there, don't be angry with your kid about this. Because if you're angry, you're going to shut them down. They're not going to come to you because they'll think they're going to get punished. They think they're going to get their cell phone taken away. They'll think they're going to get something removed. That is not the way. to help your kids. I'm curious about the interview that you have had with the mom and her son. What were they talking about? What was the content? Can you give some of that away, Joe?
So we interviewed the mom first, and she shared her anguish, and then she shared her anger. Because, like most parents who are aware that perhaps their teenagers might be experimenting with cigarettes, and so they were duped into thinking by the industry that e-cigarettes, vaping, was a safer alternative, might even have been a pathway to smoking cessation. And this mother bought into that narrative, only to find out later that her son was addicted in a big time way. And then we interviewed the son, and we found out that he has a brother younger than him who still is actively vaping as we speak. So here's the older brother trying to kick the habit while the younger brother's still active. And then you've got all kinds of tension playing out in the family. It's just heartbreaking, the amount of damage, if you will, emotional, psychological, sociological damage that occurs when this type of addiction's at play in homes.
And I don't think people appreciate it because it's just nicotine, right? And that's sort of the mindset. And it is not just nicotine. Lori, what's the experience like been for you, just being with these people and having this mission?
Well, it's sad for these kids. You really, really feel so horrible for these kids and these families. And it makes me angry because, I mean, this was, oh my gosh, many, many years ago when I smoked it and I kicked it, but it was just regular cigarettes, nothing like what they have now. So you just feel for these families and these kids. And it's so sad. I mean, kids in school are afraid to use the bathrooms because the kids are in there vaping. And if you get caught and somebody's been vaping, they pull them all into the office and they all get in trouble. So, in the bullying that goes on too, I've heard some really horrible bullying stories. Older kids bullying eighth graders to vape. So it's awful. It's awful.
So what's the psychology behind that, do you think? I mean, I know I'm a psychiatrist, but I'm going to ask anyway. So why would an older kid bully and intimidate another kid to vape? Joe, got some thoughts on that?
Well, we heard one interesting dynamic at play, and that is the older kids get the younger ones interested, so that's cultivating another level of consumer. That way, the older kid can sell to the younger ones, and that proceeds help support the older one's habit.
Wow. You want to expand on that, Lori, or what's your take on it?
It's partly that, and I just think, and it could be because I was before the internet, but I think there's bullying that goes on because of social media, and I think it's commonplace. I think kids are meaner these days. I really do. And so I think it's just commonplace. Kids get bullied online, and then why not just bully another kid? Because, it's a younger kid, get them to be in with our group. They have to vape. You have to be part of be one of the cool kids if you vape. And if you don't vape, you're not cool. So.
What do you think,
Mark?
Dr. Joe? Do you think there's a component of what we were talking about earlier, that those that are addicted, they don't want to let them out because they want to share in the pain, right? Is that maybe why they're bringing in some new ones to say, like, I don't want to be alone in this, or I want more people to feel this pain? I mean, do the kids realize they're addicted?
No, they don't.
This is great. We've got a no and a yes. Great. Go ahead, Laura.
I think it depends on your age. The older ones, they know they're addicted, and they don't care.
And Lori, you think no?
Yeah. Well, from when we interviewed Kristen, her son did not believe he was addicted. They had to have proof positive that he's destroying his lungs, that he got kicked off his hockey team, all these things. And then finally he would admit that he had an addiction, because they don't want to admit they're addicted.
Right.
But understand is different. The question is, early on, do they realize what's happening to them, or do they think, it's fun, it tastes good, it's cool, I can hide it from my parents because it vaporizes into the air. They don't even know. They could walk in my room 5 minutes later and they won't know. But it's exciting. Do they sometimes confuse the excitement with the addiction?
Probably.
That's scary.
Yeah.
And are you interviewing kids who are vaping and they have no intention of stopping?
Yes.
And how is it to be with them? I mean, just as an adult, what's that experience like, sitting with a kid like this?
It's surreal. Because that they may end up paying a price down the road.
Mm.
And because you're older than they are, they're just going to dismiss anything you have to say. So you feel helpless.
Yeah. And it's a really important word, to feel helpless, because on some level, I think what you're maybe picking up on is the unconscious of the child, who, without wanting to admit it, also feels helpless. That's part of what the addiction is.
Mm-hmm.
So you may feel helpless as an adult. You can't get through to this kid. But I've worked with a lot of kids like this. And on some level, when they realize that they're addicted, it is overwhelming. And that is part of what they have been denying. One of our phrases in psychiatry, denial is not just a river in Egypt. It's really that I don't want to look at this. And part of why they don't want to look at this is the helplessness, and then the stigma that goes along with it, and all the other things. But here's one of the techniques that we use is we say to a kid, okay, so if you're not addicted, stop. And they say, oh, no, I don't want to. I say, well, is it that you don't want to, or you can't? He says, no, I don't want to. I say, well, why don't you want to? I really like it. Well, tell me more about that. You really like it. What does it do? And then they begin to explain this, this pleasure that they get, even if it's momentary. And then we can talk with them about, well, if you need the pleasure of the nicotine, what is really going on in your life then that you can't find pleasure somewhere else? What's happening? And eventually they begin to realize that some of the vaping, the using, is the barrier to their real relationship with other people, where the real pleasure really is. So we got a lot of kids who I'll say, okay, so let me, especially when we had our inpatient unit, we didn't, it wasn't like we got kids who were there at Castle when Castle existed for vaping, but they were still addicted to nicotine. So many of them, whether it was vaping, because vaping was just coming out, or smoking, but they didn't consider it such a big deal because they were trying to get off these other drugs. And that, unfortunately, is still part of the culture. And we call it harm reduction, but it's not really harm reduction at all. It is still powerful. If you are addicted to a substance, you can say, all right, so let me just see. So you're in a treatment program. Your parents are really angry with you. You've been getting kicked out of school. You can't stop smoking. You say you don't want to, but no, I guess you don't have a problem. That's true. And they just sort of like, they sort of take that in. But, it's such important work. And it really does speak to how susceptible our community is to marketing. Because that's really what you're talking about. For those WATD viewers, please go to Take a Toke site and look at the video clip, because you'll see the ads that the marketers were using to try to entice young kids, in the guise of saying, well, this is just for adults. Those I'm not sure many adults would like go, well, that's a really interesting picture of a young kid smoking. Why would that appeal to an adult? But it's just a little older than the target age, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
A little older than that target age.
Stretch the kindness, rush with madness, is it sad? go, go.